Well, to discuss everything that's going on in Gaza in a little bit more detail, we're joined on set by Rabbi Dovid Weiss. He's a spokesperson for the Orthodox Jewish anti-Zionist organization, Neturei Karta. If you could summarize for us your feelings on what's going on in Gaza at the moment.
Well, with the help of the Almighty, I pray to the Almighty to bestow upon me His truth, His wisdom, that I may be worthy of conveying His message and sanctifying His name and bringing peace to the world, inshallah. It's not my feelings, it's the feelings of Jews around the world who are true to our religion, Judaism, a religion of 3,000 years. We hurt, we cry, we suffer, we pain with the people of Gaza beyond words what's happening to them. There's no way of expressing it in our frustration because to us it's a double nakba. It is being done in the name of my religion of 3,000 years by a movement that's 100-odd years, a political nationalist movement of non-religious Jews, Zionists, who are trying to transform my religion to nationalism and use the religion of subservience to God to cover for their creating a state, occupying another people, and by silencing anybody who dares to speak up as being anti-Semitic. This is abhorrent. It's totally not true. My religion is to serve God. My religion is not to kill or steal, not to occupy. And we're not even allowed to have a state since the destruction of the temple 2,000 years ago. And Jews held by this belief for 2,000 years strictly. And we lived with the Muslim people in peace for the 2,000 years. We lived in every Muslim and Arab country in peace and harmony. There's nothing to do with the religious conflict here.
I guess, Rabbi Weiss, given that then, what are your feelings on those in power in the state of Israel, in particular the right-wing factions there? What do you think of them? We
consider these sinners, criminals. They're using, again, maliciously, and some of them, because they've been conned into this belief, they're using the Jewish religion totally immorally, wrongly, because, again, Judaism is to keep the Torah, to serve God, as we did for hundreds of years. To occupy, to steal, to create a state is expressly forbidden according to my Torah. All the rabbis around the world for 130 years since Zionism started spoke up in every way, in every style that they had, and declared that Zionism is sinful, is a criminal, and is totally unacceptable according to my religion. The chief rabbi of Palestine in 1947, before they made the state, pleaded with the United Nations. His name was Rabbi Dushinsky. Now, when I say the chief rabbi, I mean nothing to do with the Zionists. Use the Star of David. They use the name Israel. They use all the trappings of my religion, and they made a rabbinate and chief rabbi. But we have a Jewish community with a rabbinate, Eda Charedis, God-fearing community, and the chief rabbi in 1947 was Rabbi Dushinsky, of blessed memory, and he pleaded with the United Nations, which is in their documents. He said, "We furthermore wish to express our definite opposition to a Jewish state in any part of Palestine." And since then, we've been demonstrating the tens and hundreds of thousands and being brutally beaten by the Zionists.
So given that, Rabbi Weiss, the US president isn't here today to say what he thought, but when Joe Biden said, "I'm a Zionist," what did you think of that? Well, how did that make you feel?
I've been living this bitter pill for my whole life. My father, of blessed memory, was a student, was a follower of one of the great rabbis in Europe who passed away before the Second World War, who fought tooth and nail this Zionist movement that started in Europe. And we know these are what the Zionists tell the world. Their narrative is that they're God's blessing to the world, the end of exile, what they call it, the beginning of redemption.
So he's misguided. The US president is misguided. He's listening to the wrong people.
100% either are the best. They're being misguided, and they mean well for the Jewish people. We're very thankful for the leaders of the world who want to help Jews. My grandparents were killed in Auschwitz. My father escaped the Nazis when they came to Hungary. But we appreciate people who want to do us good. But on the contrary, the support and the furtherance of the state of Israel is only causing, as you see, 75 years and more of bloodshed of the Palestinians. That's the mass slaughter that's happening now, and the Jews. 75 years of death and suffering. We live together, Jews and Muslims and Christians, together in Palestine and around the Muslim world in harmony. What changed? The only issue that changed is the introduction of this political Judaism, this ersatz Judaism called Zionism. They have created this quagmire. They are the ones who are the patrons, the ones who are the cause of endless rivers of blood of both Jews and Muslims and hate that's developed around the world. They are the personification of anti-Semitism that they are claiming and accusing others of.
Okay, well, I mean, they're not all here to defend themselves. You mentioned Auschwitz there. Something you've said in the past is that you said that Zionists use, and I quote you here, the Holocaust issue to their own benefit. 100%. Is that what you think is happening here in this war, in the defense of this war?
It's one link in a chain that they're using constantly since the creation of the state. They use the fact, the guilt of the world that was silenced when my grandparents and others were being murdered, and people feel guilty and they want to support Jewish people. But what has happening is, so ironically, is that it's not only a good for the Jewish people, it is the greatest cancer for Jewish people, because first of all, as you see, we've been estranged from our Muslim neighbors around the world. All the Jewish communities that were living in Iraq, in Tunisia, in Egypt, they're all gone. And where did they go to? They disappeared because of Zionism. And the ones who are living in the Holy Land, first of all, they totally misconstrue what it means to be a Jew. A Jew means to serve God, to keep the Sabbath, keep the Ten Commandments, keep the kosher, all the laws, while Israel proudly announces they're a democracy. You're free of keeping the laws of the Torah. So you see the duplicity, the hypocrisy, and what it means a Jewish is a religion. How could you throw away God's commandments and then claim that you're doing God's will? And what God's will is here when you're murdering in the tens of thousands of people here. We can't be silent on this, what's happening to the people of Gaza. And mind you, we really have to point out that when the Jews stood up, we're never militant. We never carry guns, our communities. We never carry knives. And boys and girls get arrested because we refuse to serve in the army. They get brutally beaten. This is already for 75 years. Children, old men, because simply we're standing out on the streets of Jerusalem and saying, this is unacceptable. The occupation is not Judaism. And they don't want to hear that. And they brutally, this is the army for Israel.
I can
if
see
this,
the, yeah,
if this would happen here in Turkey or in the United States, they would be on the plane, Netanyahu, screaming anti-Semitism, yet they do this with impunity. How come?
I can understand the strength of your feeling. I suppose to move to a slightly more practical question then, you presumably then don't believe in a two-state solution.
No.
So what is the answer to this conflict? What do you see as being a good outcome from what's happening now?
Well, first of all, we have to be very clear. There is two distinct issues. For a doctor to prescribe a medicine, he has to diagnose the sickness. And if he falsely diagnoses the sickness, he can be sued for criminal negligence. The sickness here is not a difference of religion between Jews and Muslims. History attests. Anybody who's older than 75 will remember how we lived together in harmony. So it has nothing to do with the distinctly different religions that we practice together. We live together and practice a different religion. The issue is an introduction of a political movement that came from Europe on the heads and shoulders of the majority Muslims. The second community was Christians, and the third was Jewish, which was God-fearing community. And all three of them did not want this new type of Judaism that's going to rule, called Zionism in the state of Israel.
So where do you see it going then? What should be the answer or the outcome of this conflict in Gaza? Let's look forward.
First, anybody could, in order to come to a solution, the world first has to realize that they're futilely trying to come to a solution because they're trying to solve two religions that are fighting, which is not the question here. The issue is that the religions can get along together. Something came along. It's like you're putting a bandage on a hemorrhaging wound. They have to understand that Zionism is the problem. What is the solution? I mean, now that if you understand the sickness, anybody can come along and I think the most practical and logical thing is to remove this just like apartheid was removed, it wasn't a problem between blacks and whites. It was this concept that the blacks are second-class citizens and that they have to be oppressed. The same thing here. If you remove this oppression of the Palestinians, you remove this selfish political game that they want to take over the land, then we can live together, Jews and Muslims. And we've had what's the problem of coexisting? It's just the implementing of a forceful occupation of a movement that's calling themselves Jewish. Remove that, we can have a fine Judaism that we had for thousands of years, practicing our religions properly and living together with the Muslims who love us. We lived together, they protected us. And we, in fact, as Jews, we have to show gratitude, good to us. It was the Muslim countries that gave us a home. And we have to show gratitude to that. It's part of the Nakba, the vilification of people who did good to us.
Rabbi Yisrael Dovid Weiss, thank you so much for joining me. It was really good to hear from you. Thank you.
The Bible says that there is a time for peace and a time for war. לעולם לא נשכח את מעשה הזוועה שעשו לנו אויבינו. אנחנו הולמים באויבינו בעוצמה חסרת תקדים. אני מדגיש, זאת רק ההתחלה. They've made a mistake of historic proportions. We will exact a price that will be remembered by them and Israel's other enemies for decades to come.
Israel has responded with fury. Fighter jets taking aim at targets in the Palestinian territory.
More than 10,000 people have been killed since this conflict began.
كل الدار فيها 1000 واحد هنا في المنطقة كلهم استشهدوا.
As the Israel-Hamas war drags on, backlash against Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is growing at home. Former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert has heavily criticized Netanyahu.
He's the worst person to have to deal with it. I think that he is really in a nervous breakdown. A person who has portrayed himself and presented himself for many years as Mr. Security failed in the most fundamental obligation for his citizens, which is to provide them with security.
Today, Netanyahu's leadership is on the verge of imploding, deeply unpopular with his own people and under immense pressure from the international community.
La lutte doit être sans merci, mais pas sans règles.
This is a fall from grace for a man who was reportedly told by one of the most powerful Jewish religious figures in the world that he would be the one to welcome the Messiah. "40 years ago, when Netanyahu was Israel's ambassador to the United Nations, he met Menachem Mendel Schneerson, the leader of the Chabad Lubavitch movement, known simply as the Rebe.
He said, you're going to this house of darkness, the UN, which was very, very unfriendly to Israel at the time. He called it the house of darkness. And he said, even in the greatest darkness, if you light a candle, it spreads a great light that can be seen from afar.
The Rebbe reportedly believed Netanyahu had a mission from God to prepare Israel for the coming of the Messiah, or in Hebrew, the Moshiach. Over the next decade, the two men developed a close relationship. Soon after entering Israel's parliament for the first time, Netanyahu paid his respects to his mentor.
Back then, Netanyahu was probably the only ally that he could work with in Israeli politics. He obviously demands from Netanyahu to take some steps to hasten the coming of Messiah, which is to make Israel a more religious place and to take certain concrete steps in this regard. And Netanyahu says, I'm definitely doing that.
מה שהוא יאות, וגם משהו שעדיין משאיר ליבו. אז הייתה מה שהוא ממה ידיעתו.
עושים.
הכנראה שהיא מספיק, כאילו שהיום כבר כמה שעות בגלל ועדיין ליבו.
The Rebbe never visited Israel, not once, and yet from his home in Brooklyn, he was able to influence Israeli politics.
הבטיחו לי בוועד כמה הבטחה שמכל השיחות תהיינה כל עניינים של ויתור על שטחים.
His influence was recognized by American politicians too. US presidents paid homage to him, establishing and proclaiming a National Education and Sharing Day in honor of his birthday.
And please give my warmest regards to the Rebbe on this his 86th birthday.
Menachem Mendel Schneerson was born in 1902 in the Black Sea port of Nikolaev, which was part of the Russian Empire but now part of Ukraine. He and his wife lived in Berlin and Paris before fleeing the Nazis in 1941, seeking refuge in New York, where they put down roots. A decade later, in 1951, he took over the Chabad movement from his father-in-law, who died the previous year. Menachem Schneerson revived and grew the movement for over 40 years until his death in New York in 1994. His followers in Brooklyn were devastated.
Most of them believed he would never die. They still believe Rabbi Menachem Schneerson will be physically resurrected as Mashiach, the Messiah.
A physical resurrection when he's going to come back in his full glory imminently and redeem the entire world.
Currently, the center of the Chabadic movement is in Brooklyn, in a neighborhood called Crown Heights. So it is an American movement in terms of its center, but it is also a global movement. One of the biggest purposes of Chabad is to bring those quote-unquote lost Jews back into Judaism. So Chabad has its own rabbis and emissaries appointed all around the world. It is a global movement.
Headquartered in Brooklyn, the Chabad movement has a presence in every state in America and in over 100 countries around the world, with a particularly high focus in Europe and in Israel. It has hundreds of thousands of followers and runs synagogues, schools, drug rehabilitation centers, and care homes. On the face of it, the movement has been for the betterment of Jews around the world. But according to one analyst, its modus operandi has provided a template for a terror group.
We have good reasons to believe that Fatah got inspired from the Chabad movement. One of the high-ranking members of the Fatah movement was praising the Chabad movement in the sense that the Chabad used to send its emissaries and rabbis all around the world, just like Fatah was doing, sending out teachers to Central Asia and to Africa and to other parts of the world.
For over 40 years, the charismatic Rebbe led the movement. His $1 donations, including to Netanyahu, came with a blessing to his followers and a reminder to give to those less fortunate. A couple of years after this meeting, the Rebbe reportedly told a young Netanyahu that he would one day become Prime Minister of Israel and would be the nation's last leader before handing the scepter to the Messiah. This first part of the Rebbe's prediction came true in 1996, when a 47-year-old Benjamin Netanyahu became Prime Minister for the first time. But his government fell just 3 years later. For a while, Netanyahu withdrew from politics. The Rebbe's words faded into history until a decade later, Netanyahu became Prime Minister for a second time.
העם רוצה שינוי. העם רוצה ללכת בדרך אחרת. הדרך שלנו ניצחה. היא הדרך שתוביל את העם.
Netanyahu's second premiership lasted for over 12 years, until he was eventually ousted by his political opponents. Another setback for anyone who believed in the Rebbe's messianic prophecy. But Netanyahu was back just a few months later, forming a coalition with ultra-Orthodox and religious Zionist parties. he began his third premiership almost exactly a year ago. And it's been a tumultuous year. His hardline government has massively accelerated the construction of Israeli settlements in the West Bank, considered illegal under international law. It's also provoked massive protests by attempting to grab more power for itself at the expense of other branches of government. The protests threatened to bring down Netanyahu's government. But then, on October 7th, everything changed.
Breaking news out of Israel this morning where Hamas has launched a surprise attack.
A massive surprise attack.
Hundreds of Hamas fighters poured across breached border points.
They attacked by air, land and sea, taking Israel by surprise.
With many in his own country blaming him for the worst security failure in Israel's history, Netanyahu is once again relying on religious language to rally the country.
The Bible says that there is a time for peace and a time for war. This is a time for war.
That kind of language is recognized by evangelical Christians in the United States, who are still able to influence US policy in the Middle East.
Netanyahu took that Bible verse from Ecclesiastes 3.
Netanyahu spent many years living and working in the United States and has always believed in his ability to influence America.
אבל אנחנו הולכים למסלול התנגשות עם הממשל האמריקאי. ארצות הברית זה לא מקשה אחת, זה לא מקשה אחת. יש את הסנאט, יש את הקונגרס, יש את הכוח היהודי שהוא עצום, יותר חזק משהיה אי פעם. יש דעת קהל, יש לנו כוחות כבירים בדעת הקהל שמתנגדים למדיניות הזאת, גדולי הפרשנים. אמריקה לא תכפה לנו דבר, אם לא נכפה.
And today, his relationship with President Joe Biden may not be perfect, but that confidence, at least outwardly, is still there.
בשיחותיי עם הנשיא ביידן ועם מנהיגים אחרים בעולם ובמאמצים רבים אחרים, אנחנו מגייסים לישראל תמיכה בינלאומית כבירה. אנחנו מבטיחים את המשך המלחמה עם עוד תחמושת שמגיעה לארץ, עוד אמצעי לחימה. אנחנו נחסל את החמאס, אנחנו נביא ניצחון.
Today, Netanyahu compares his war with Hamas to Israel's battle with the Amalek in the Old Testament.
You must remember what Amalek has done to you, says our Holy Bible, and we do remember and we are fighting.
The Amalek was one of Israel's arch enemies, and in some parts of the Old Testament, God commanded they should be destroyed. Some commentators believe this is what Netanyahu is signaling with his biblical references.
Amalek is a sign of people what was evil people, and they try to take away Jewish people from God, to divide them from God and to take them away from God. He's doing the same thing what Amalek has done. He's doing what Amalek has done. So how he coming to speak in the name of the Torah, in the name of the Jewish religion, when he don't believe in the Torah, he don't believe in God?
Benjamin Netanyahu is known to be a secular Jew, but he certainly saw the value in being associated with the Rebbe, whose presence is still felt in Israel even 30 years after his death. Sitting alongside his Zionist and ultra-Orthodox allies, Netanyahu may or may not believe in God, but he certainly believes in retribution, visiting violence of biblical proportions upon the people of Gaza.
Now, these are actual recordings of rabbis speaking about the value of Palestinian lives, especially children's lives. Now, listen.
Must obliterate Hamas, you see. And what Israel has to do, which I'm hoping, of course, they will, is they're going to what's called raise Gaza. They're going to destroy it. What is important to understand, what the logic of the war is based on the divine plan. There is no permission from the Torah to have any mercy whatsoever during war. Not on children, not on women, not on anybody.
But the point is right here that Hashem say, do not have mercy on the children. Kill all their children also. Why? There's no difference between them and their children. In 10 years from now, these children will attack you on the way. Hashem knows, God knows.
We're not playing by your rules. We're playing by the rules of the Torah.
The verse in the whole Bible, it says, happy is the one that takes the infants of Babel and of Edom and smashes them on the rock. And this is what we say before benching. Right? That's the end of this. The ultimate revenge again, are going innocent infants. Happy is the one that takes the infants and smashes them and kills them on the rock. And then we bless Hashem for the food that we ate.
You kill all men and all women, me'olel ve'ad yonek, even babies who breastfeed.
Okay, no equivocation there. That's how many of them feel. Those are rabbis speaking, not the average man on the street or woman on the street. That's how they feel. So this is not going to have a happy ending, obviously.
No, and I would preface my comment first. I'm going to quote a prophecy from a man who died in the year 1300.
Right.
His name was Abbot Herman of Lenin. He said, toward the end of the world, Israel will commit a terrible crime for which it will suffer death.
Wow.
Now, you mentioned how cold and calculating these Zionists are in what they're doing and what they are subjecting, not just the Palestinians, but even the Jewish people are being subjected to.
This was clearly a planned operation. The Israelis knew. They know everything that goes on in Gaza. And this was a political, weaponized effort to take the pressure off Netanyahu and give the state of Israel full pretense and pretext to annihilate Gaza once and for all. Timing.
There was a report, and this cannot be considered anti-Semitic. It's coming from a newspaper called Haaretz, a big Israeli.
Big paper. Big paper in Israel. Big.
That's right. Haaretz.com. This is their report, quoting Benjamin Netanyahu. And these are his words. Anyone who wants to thwart the establishment of a Palestinian state has to support bolstering Hamas and transferring money to Hamas.
Mm-hmm.
This is part of our strategy. This certainly expresses the policy. And this is it's not without precedent. Haaretz has reported years ago that these Hamas militants were actually being funded and directed by the Shin Bet.
There's no question that Hamas and the CIA are enemies. But when you look at the history, you find that the CIA and Mossad actually created Hamas. I have the video up there. It goes back to, I think it's 20 years ago. It's Netanyahu talking about forming Hamas. There's so much more going on here. Yeah.
Whenever we see a development leading toward peace, one of these organizations commits some kind of atrocity and everything back to square one. That's by design. That's by design.
Absolutely.
It's ironic. It's ironic that they are speaking of this Hamas attack on Israel as Israel's 9/11, because the September 11th attack took place because the Pentagon ordered a stand down of the defenses. There's no way the Pentagon could have been attacked unless the air defenses stood down. And this is exactly what happened in Israel. The technology used to defend the Israeli border is so sophisticated and so flawless that they even say not even a rodent can escape unseen. A rodent or a cockroach will be seen approaching that fence. There's no way. There's no way they could have pulled this off by surprise.